Chapter 1. The Mysterious Invitation. London, October 1936. A cold drizzle tapped against the tall windows of Whitehaven Mansions. Hercule Poirot, wrapped in a silk dressing-gown the colour of ripe figs, was arranging his morning correspondence with the precision of a jeweller setting diamonds. The letter that interested him lay apart from the others. The envelope was heavy cream stock, the flap sealed with scarlet wax impressed by a crest, a lighthouse encircled by coral. Inside, the handwriting was elegant yet impatient. My dear Monsieur Poirot, you will not remember me, but 20 years ago you performed a small service for my late father, Sir Reginald Hargrove, in the matter of the Cairo emeralds. I now beg a greater service. 3 days ago, on the night of the full moon, my wife, Lady Beatrice Beaumont, vanished from the coral lighthouse on my private island off the Cornish coast. The doors were locked from within. The windows are 70 feet above the rocks. No boat could have approached in the storm. Yet she is gone, utterly. The police call it suicide or accident. They are fools. Something sinister walks the spiral stair of that lighthouse, and I fear I shall be the next to disappear. Come at once. Money is no object. Only bring your little grey cells. Yours in desperation, Lord Evelyn Beaumont, Beaumont Isle. Cornwall Poirot twirled the tips of his moustaches, which were, as always, magnificent. Curieux, he murmured. A lady who vanishes from a lock tower above the raging sea. It has the perfume of drama. And drama, mon ami, is the natural habitat of crime. He rang the bell for George, his valet. Pack for 3 days, perhaps 4. We travel to Cornwall tonight, and bring the thick coat with the astrakhan collar. The English sea air, it is murderous. George raised a discreet eyebrow. Very good, sir. Shall I inform Captain Hastings? Alas, Hastings is in Argentina pursuing a lady of uncertain temperament. This time, Hercule Poirot must manage alone. By evening, Poirot was seated in the first-class carriage of the Cornish Riviera Express, the scarlet-sealed letter resting in his waistcoat pocket like a small, warm coal. Outside, the rain streamed down the windows. And somewhere ahead, across black water, a pink coral lighthouse rose from an island no chart dared name. The vanishing had already begun. Hey, detective, quick question. Where in the world are you solving mysteries from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you want more twisted tales, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's case, it gets even creepier. Stay sharp. Chapter 2. Journey to the Coral Isle. The night train hissed into Penzance at 6:30 in the morning, a grey dawn crawling over the slate roofs. A motor car, long, black, and smelling faintly of wet dog, waited at the curb. The chauffeur touched his cap. Lord Beaumont's compliments, sir. Tide serves at 7. We must make haste. Poirot allowed himself to be handed in like a parcel of particular fragility. The car lurched down narrow lanes where the hedges dripped like weeping women, then onto a private jetty hidden beneath cliffs the colour of gunmetal. A sleek motor yacht lay alongside, its brass bright despite the salt. On the transom, in flowing gold script, was painted Coral Queen. The crew wore dark jerseys with a tiny embroidered lighthouse on the breast. As the yacht nosed out into Mounts Bay, Poirot stood at the rail, wrapped in his greatcoat. The sea was the dull green of a sergeant major's uniform. Gulls wheeled and screamed like unpaid creditors. 20 minutes later, the island appeared, rising suddenly, a black tooth in the water. At its highest point stood the lighthouse, not the usual candy stripe, but built entirely of rose-pink coral stone quarried from some forgotten tropical reef, and shipped here, block by an eccentric Beaumont ancestor. Against the sullen sky, it glowed like a drop of blood in milk. The yacht rounded the island and entered a small, perfect cove. A flight of steps had been cut into the living rock, zigzagging upward to a terrace of wind-bitten lawn. At the top waited 3 figures. The tallest was clearly Lord Evelyn Beaumont, 45, perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, face burnt brown by wind and grief. His eyes were the pale, washed blue of a man who has not slept. Beside him stood a woman of about 30, dressed in tweeds the colour of storm clouds. She was handsome in the English fashion. Strong bones, clear skin, mouth set like a steel trap. This, Poirot guessed at once, must be Miss Diana Hargrove, sister to the vanished lady and the author of the desperate letter. The third figure was a man Poirot recognised from the society pages. Captain Ralph Morstan, late of the Indian Army, moustache like a yard broom, shoulders that suggested cricket pavilions and regimental dinners. His expression was one of polite boredom, masking something sharper. Lord Beaumont came forward, hand outstretched. "Monsieur Poirot, you are kinder than I deserve. The world thinks me mad or murderous. You, at least, have come." Poirot inclined his head with exquisite courtesy. "One does not refuse a lighthouse built of coral, milord. It is unique. Like crime, it demands attention." Miss Hargrove gave a short, humourless laugh. "Unique is the word, monsieur. My sister has managed a disappearance worthy of Houdini from a tower that has only one key, and that key never left Evelyn's pocket." Captain Morstan cleared his throat. "Shall we go in? There's a wind getting up, and the house feels the weather." As they climbed the final steps, Poirot glanced back. The yacht had already cast off and was dwindling into the haze. The island was alone with the sea. Behind him, the great door of coral-coloured stone shut with the finality of a tomb. Chapter 3. Arrival at the lighthouse. The house was not a house at all, but a long, low fortress of the same rose-coral stone, crouched beneath the tower like a lioness guarding her cub. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of salt, lamp oil, and something sweeter, jasmine perhaps, that did not belong on this wind-lashed rock. A butler as ancient and grey as driftwood took Poirot's coat and hat with the reverence due to sacred relics. Lord Beaumont led the way into a hall panelled in dark oak. A fire roared, yet the room felt cold. Above the mantel hung a portrait of Lady Beatrice Beaumont. Poirot stopped beneath it as though struck. She had been beautiful in the dangerous way of tropical orchids, skin like moonlight on water, hair the colour of midnight, and eyes, those extraordinary eyes, the green of a reef seen from above, just before it tears the bottom out of a ship. Even in paint she looked as though she might step down from the frame and vanish again, leaving only the scent of jasmine. "She was painted 3 months ago," Miss Hargrove said quietly. "She hated sitting for it, said the artist had caught her soul and she wanted it back." Captain Morstan gave a short bark of laughter that died the instant it left his throat. Lord Beaumont did not look at the portrait at all. "Come," he said, voice rough. "You will wish to see the tower." They passed through a green baize door, down a stone passage, and out onto a terrace whipped by spray. 20 yards away rose the lighthouse itself, joined to the house by a covered bridge of iron and glass. The tower was perfectly cylindrical, 80 feet high, crowned by a lantern of brass and crystal, now dulled by salt. A single door of oak bound with iron faced them. Above it, carved deep into the coral stone, was the Beaumont crest, and beneath it the words Lux in Tenebris, though at present the light was unlit, and the darkness very present indeed. Lord Beaumont produced a key as long as a man's hand. "Only two exist," he said. "This one never leaves me. The duplicate is in the safe at my London bank. No one else has ever held either." He turned the key. The door opened with a sigh, as though the tower had been holding its breath. Inside, a spiral staircase of iron curled upward like the inside of a nautilus shell. The walls wept moisture. Their footsteps rang. At the top they emerged into the service room. Copper tanks, coils of rope, a small oil stove now cold. A second, narrower stair led to the lantern gallery itself. Poirot walked slowly around the circular chamber. The great lens, dormant, stared out to sea like the eye of a blind god. Rain lashed the glass. Below, the rocks gnawed at the base of the tower with white teeth. Lord Beaumont pointed to a small table. "That is where Beatrice sat. She came every evening to read or write letters while the lamp was being trimmed. On the night she vanished, she was alone here from 9 o'clock until the storm broke at 11. I myself locked the door at the foot of the tower at 9:15 after bringing her a cup of chocolate. The mechanic, old Trewather, left at 9. After that, no living soul entered or left." "And the windows?" Poirot asked. "Fixed, triple thickness, not made to open. You may examine them." Poirot did. The frames were iron, painted white, the glass thick as a bottle bottom. No sign of disturbance. Miss Hargrove spoke from the stairwell, voice brittle. At 11:30, Evelyn went to fetch her in because the storm was growing murderous. The door at the bottom was still locked. He opened it, called up. No answer, he climbed. The service room was empty. The lantern room was empty. Her book lay open on the table. Her fur wrap was on the chair. Her cup of chocolate, half drunk. But Beatrice, gone. Captain Morstan lit a cigarette with fingers that were not quite steady. The police came next day when the sea allowed. They found nothing. No note, no struggle, no body on the rocks. They say she must have slipped out somehow, walked into the sea, but from 80 feet up, in that gale, without unlocking the door. Poirot stood at the centre of the room, hands clasped behind his back, eyes half closed. "Tell me, my lord," he said softly, "this tower, it was built when? By my great-grandfather in 1867. The coral was brought from the Red Sea as ballast. He was eccentric. And the light itself, decommissioned in 1904 when the new lighthouse was built on the headland. Since then it has been private, a folly, a place of retreat." Poirot opened his eyes. They glittered green in the dimness. "A retreat," he repeated, "or perhaps a prison." Lord Beaumont flinched as though struck. Poirot smiled, small and cat-like. "Come, let us descend. Hercule Poirot has seen enough, for the moment. Tonight he will think. Tomorrow, perhaps, the little grey cells will begin to dance." As they filed down the iron stairs, the wind howled around the tower like a woman denied entrance. Behind them, unnoticed, a single petal of jasmine, fresh, impossible, lay on the table beside the cold cup of chocolate. Chapter 4. The enigmatic Lady Beaumont dinner was served at 8 in a long room, whose windows rattled like dice in a cup. The table was set for 5. Lord Beaumont at the head, Miss Hargrove on his right, Captain Morstan on his left, Poirot beside Miss Hargrove, and an empty place opposite him that no one mentioned yet everyone saw. Silver candelabra threw trembling light on all Beaumont silver, and crystal thin as eggshell. The fish was sole, the wine a 28 Meursault that tasted of apples and terror. Conversation limped. Lord Beaumont drank steadily, his eyes fixed on the vacant chair, as though his wife might yet materialize and scold him for beginning without her. Miss Diana Hargrove spoke first, voice sharp enough to cut rope. "You have seen the tower, Monsieur Poirot. Tell us plainly, is my sister alive?" Poirot dabbed his moustache with exquisite care. Alive or dead, mademoiselle, she is certainly not where one expects her to be. That is the beginning of wisdom." Captain Morstan leaned forward, forearms like oak beams. "Look here, Poirot. We're not children to be frightened with ghost stories. There are only 4 people on this island tonight. Evelyn, Diana, myself, and old Trewather, who tends the lamp when it is lit for pleasure. The servants sleep in the village on the mainland and come by boat each morning. No one could have taken Beatrice away. No one could have harmed her without the rest of us knowing." "4 people," Poirot repeated softly. "And yet on the night of the disappearance there were 6. Yourself, Lord Beaumont, Miss Hargrove, Lady Beaumont, the mechanic Trewather, and who was the 6th? A log cracked in the grate. No one answered at once. Then Miss Hargrove said very low, 'There was no 6th. "Ah, but there was," Poirot murmured. "I speak, of course, of Mr. Felix Carver." Lord Beaumont's glass stopped halfway to his lips. Wine trembled, a single crimson drop sliding down the stem like blood. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked at last. "From the excellent Inspector Vane, who investigated for the Cornish Constabulary. He is a man of limited imagination, but impeccable thoroughness. He mentioned a house guest who departed for London the very morning after the disappearance. A gentleman described as artistic, rather excitable, much attached to Lady Beaumont." Captain Morstan gave a short, unpleasant laugh. "Attached? The fellow was in love with her, poor devil. Followed her about like a stray dog. Beatrice laughed at him, of course. She laughed at all of them." "Morstan," Lord Beaumont warned. "Well, it's true. Your wife collected admirers the way other women collect hatpins. Felix Carver was merely the latest." Poirot raised a hand, delicate as a conductor silencing an orchestra. "Enough. I wish to know Lady Beaumont herself, not the opinions of her admirers. Mademoiselle Hargrove, you are her sister. Describe her to me, not the portrait, not the gossip, the woman." Diana Hargrove stared into the candle flame until her eyes watered. "Beatrice was restless. She was born restless. Our father used to say she had quicksilver in her veins instead of blood. She married Evelyn because he promised her the world on a coral platter, this island, the yacht, freedom to come and go. But even here she grew bored. She said the sea was a wall, not a window. She began to speak of leaving." "Leaving her husband?" Poirot asked gently. "Leaving everything. She told me once that dying would be less trouble than divorce, and far more amusing." Lord Beaumont rose so violently his chair crashed backward. "That is a lie." His voice cracked like a whip. "Beatrice was happy. We were happy." He strode from the room. The door slammed. Silence fell, thick as dust. Captain Morstan righted the chair with deliberate calm. "Pay no attention. Grief makes us all say foolish things." Poirot turned to Diana. "And you, mademoiselle? Did you believe your sister happy?" She met his gaze steadily. "I believed she was playing a dangerous game, and that one day the dice would come up snake eyes." Later, in the guest bedchamber, whose windows looked straight down into the roaring darkness, Poirot sat fully dressed on the edge of the bed. He held in his palm the single jasmine petal he had pocketed in the lantern room. Fresh. Impossible in October on a bare Atlantic rock. He lifted it to his nose. The scent was heady, almost obscene. "Somewhere on this island," he murmured to the empty room, "there is a conservatory or a locked room where tropical flowers still bloom, and somewhere, perhaps, a woman who wears jasmine in her hair still breathes." He placed the petal carefully between the pages of his little leather notebook, closed it, and smiled into the dark. "Tomorrow, mes amis, the investigation truly begins, and Hercule Poirot, he never fails when a beautiful woman vanishes into thin air. Chapter 5. Whispers of the Past. The next morning broke sullen and pewter grey. Spray flew over the terrace like thrown gravel. Poirot, wrapped in a voluminous cape the colour of wet violets, insisted on walking the entire circumference of the island before breakfast. Lord Beaumont protested. The wind would tear the little detective from the cliff and hurl him into the Atlantic. Poirot merely tapped his Malacca cane against the stone and replied that the wind had tried with lesser men and failed. They set off in single file. Poirot, Lord Beaumont, Captain Morstan, and, at Poirot's courteous insistence, Miss Hargrove. Old Trewather the mechanic remained behind, muttering about tides and rheumatism. The path was no wider than a tightrope in places. Below, the sea boiled in caverns that had names older than the Beaumonts: the Devil's Bellows, the Nun's Regret, the Cauldron of Lure. Gulls hung in the updraft like white scraps of paper nailed to the sky. Halfway round, they came upon a small iron door set flush into the cliff face. Rust bled from it in long red tears. "What is this?" Poirot demanded. Lord Beaumont hesitated. "An old magazine. My great-grandfather stored powder there when he feared French invasion. It has not been opened in 50 years. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "One never knows. Keys, my lord." Beaumont produced his ring. None fitted. The lock was choked with corrosion. "Later," Poirot said softly. "Later we shall return with oil and persuasion." They continued. At the northernmost point stood a ruined chapel, roofless, its altar split by a rowan tree that had seeded itself in the cracked stone. Miss Hargrove crossed herself, though Poirot suspected it was habit rather than faith. Inside the chapel, carved into the wall behind where the crucifix once hung, were words in Latin, worn but legible. Peccatrix in tenebris lux est. The sinful woman is the light in darkness. Captain Morstan read them aloud and gave a short, embarrassed laugh. Great-grandpapa Beaumont was evidently a pious old devil, or a sarcastic one, Diana Hargrove said. Poirot traced the letters with a gloved finger. "Curious theology," he murmured. They completed the circuit in silence. By the time they regained the house, cheeks raw and coats soaked with spray, breakfast waited. Kippers, eggs the colour of buttercups, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Afterwards, Poirot requested private interviews. First came Miss Diana Hargrove. She sat very straight in the small morning room, hands folded like a schoolgirl summoned by the headmistress. "Tell me of Felix Carver," Poirot began without preamble. Diana's mouth tightened. "Felix is a painter. Quite talented, actually. He came in July to paint Beatrice against the Coral Tower. Evelyn encouraged it. He wanted a new portrait. But Felix fell violently in love. Beatrice liked to be adored. She let him believe there was hope. And on the night of the disappearance? Felix quarrelled with Evelyn at dinner, said some unforgivable things about possessive husbands and caged birds. He packed and left at dawn. The yacht took him to Penzance. I myself watched it go. Poirot leaned forward. "And you, mademoiselle? Where were you between 9 and 11 that night?" "In my room, reading. I had the headache." "No one can confirm this. No one asked me to be confirmed until now." Poirot dismissed her with a courteous nod. Next, Captain Morstan strode in, filling the doorway like a guards officer. "Fire away, old boy," he said cheerfully. "I've nothing to hide. Except perhaps your feelings for Lady Beaumont." Morstan's smile thinned. "Dash it all, man, a fellow can admire beauty without wanting to murder anyone. Beatrice was a corker. We flirted, nothing more. And yet you remained on the island after Mr. Carver departed, Why?" "Evelyn asked me to stay. Said he felt uneasy. Storm coming, that sort of thing. Besides, someone had to keep an eye on Diana. Girl was becoming unhinged with worry about her sister. Unhinged enough, perhaps, to harm her." Morstan's face darkened. "That's a foul suggestion, Poirot." "Murder is always foul, Captain. That is why it interests me." When Morstan had gone, stamping like an angry bull, Poirot sat alone for a long time, fingertips pressed together, eyes half closed. At noon he sought out old Trewather. The mechanic was in the engine shed, polishing brass that did not need polishing. He was a man of 70, bent like a shepherd's crook, with one eye milky from cataract. "Tell me, mon vieux," Poirot said gently, "on the night Lady Beaumont vanished, you left the tower at 9 o'clock?" "Aye. His lordship brought her chocolate, locked the door after me. I went to my cottage." "You heard nothing later? No cry? No splash?" Trewather spat accurately into a bucket. "Wind was screaming fit to wake the drowned. Couldn't hear Gabriel's trumpet that night." Poirot thanked him and stepped outside. There, half hidden beneath a tangle of tamarisk, he found what he had been seeking since dawn. A small glass lean-to built against the lee of the house. A conservatory, no larger than a railway carriage, its panes filmed with salt. The door was locked, but the key hung on a nail just inside the scullery, plainly labelled in faded ink, "Winter Garden." Inside, the air was humid, heavy with the scent of earth and flowers. Oranges glowed like lanterns in the gloom. A lemon tree leaned beneath its burden. And in the centre, rampant and impossible, grew a night-blooming jasmine in full insolent flower. Poirot plucked a single blossom and tucked it into his buttonhole. "So," he whispered to the warm green darkness, "the lady who vanished still leaves her perfume behind her. But is it memory or presence?" From the depths of the foliage came the faintest rustle, as though something or someone had drawn breath and then thought better of it. Poirot smiled his small, contented smile. "Patience," he told the silence. "Hercule Poirot is a patient hunter. And the prey, she always returns to water." Chapter 6. The Vanishing. That evening the storm returned with the fury of an unpaid debt. By 9 o'clock the wind was howling through the chimneys like a pack of wolves, and the sea flung itself against the island as though determined to wipe the Beaumonts from the face of the earth. The electric generator coughed and failed. Oil lamps and candles were lit, throwing long, restless shadows. Dinner had been a silent affair. Lord Beaumont drank brandy instead of eating. Diana Hargrove's hands trembled so violently that her spoon rattled against the soup bowl. Only Captain Morstan preserved a kind of desperate joviality, telling loud, pointless stories about tiger hunts no one wished to hear. At 9:30 Poirot rose. "Milord, I wish to revisit the tower. Tonight, at once." Beaumont stared at him as though he had suggested a swim to America. "In this weather, you will be blown away like a leaf." "Leaves, milord, are sometimes the only things that find their way into locked rooms. Come, bring your key." They went out into the storm. 4 of them, Beaumont, Morstan, Diana and Poirot, heads down against the wind, coats flapping like battle flags. The covered bridge to the lighthouse swayed and groaned. Spray exploded against the glass roof above them. Beaumont's hand shook so badly he could scarcely fit the great key into the lock. When the door finally opened, the wind rushed in, as though it had been waiting a lifetime for invitation. They climbed the iron spiral slowly, the storm roaring louder with every step. In the service room, the oil stove had been lit earlier. It still gave a sullen heat. Poirot looked about him with the air of a man returning to the scene of a play he has already memorized. Lady Beaumont's book lay exactly where it had lain 3 nights before, a volume of Baudelaire, open at Le Balcon. The fur wrap still draped the chair. The chocolate cup, half empty, a faint skin on the surface, stood on the table. Poirot lifted the cup and sniffed. Still the faint aroma of almonds, he murmured. Beaumont went white. Almonds? You mean— I mean nothing yet, my lord. Only that chocolate and bitter almonds sometimes keep company. He moved to the narrow stair that led to the lantern room. The others followed, reluctant. The great lens loomed above them, black and blind. Rain lashed the windows with the sound of thrown pebbles. Poirot walked once around the gallery, tapping the glass with the ferrule of his cane. Then he stopped at the western arc, directly above the sheer drop to the rocks. "Here," he said softly. The others crowded behind him. "Here the glass is cleaner," Poirot continued. "See, a circle the size of a man's head, wiped clear of salt, and here," he pointed to the iron frame, "the paint is scratched, very faint but fresh. Someone has opened a pane that was not meant to open." Beaumont's voice cracked. "Impossible! These windows are welded shut." "Welded by rust, perhaps, but rust yields to determination and a cold chisel." Captain Morstan pushed forward, rain dripping from his moustache. "You're saying someone climbed 80 feet up the outside wall in a gale, opened a window, entered, disposed of Beatrice, and climbed down again, without ropes, without being seen." "I say nothing of the sort," Poirot replied calmly. "I say only what I see, and I see that this window has been disturbed. That is fact. The explanation— ah, that is another matter." Diana Hargrove suddenly laughed, a high, breaking sound that made the men flinch. "She did it herself," she cried. "Don't you understand? Beatrice staged her own disappearance. She was always threatening to vanish, to punish us all. She loved melodrama more than life." Lord Beaumont rounded on her. "Stop it! She would never— wouldn't she?" Diana's eyes blazed. "She told me the week before that she had found a way to leave the island forever, and that none of us would ever find her. She said it would be her masterpiece." Silence fell, broken only by the storm. Poirot raised a hand. "Enough. We return to the house. Tomorrow, when the light is better, we will examine the cliff beneath this window. Tonight, the sea keeps its secrets." They descended. Beaumont locked the tower door with fingers that barely functioned. As they crossed the swaying bridge, lightning clawed across the sky, illuminating for one heartbeat the entire island. The coral tower glowing blood-red, the house crouched beneath it, the cliffs dropping into chaos. And in that frozen second, Poirot saw, or believed he saw, a figure in white at the very top of the lighthouse, arms outstretched to the storm, hair streaming like a banner. Then darkness swallowed everything. Back in the house, soaked and shaken, they gathered in the hall. Beaumont poured brandy with a shaking hand. No one spoke. At 11 o'clock exactly, the lights of a boat were seen approaching through the storm. The servants returning from the mainland earlier than expected, driven by some urgency. Old Trewather met them at the door, his face the colour of tallow. "My lord," he croaked, "they've found something. On the rocks below the tower, washed up with the weed." He held out a sodden bundle. Beaumont took it with trembling fingers and unwrapped it. Inside was a woman's evening slipper of silver kid, the heel snapped clean away. On the insole, embroidered in seed pearls, was a tiny crest, the coral lighthouse. Beaumont made a sound like an animal in pain and sank to his knees. Diana Hargrove stared at the slipper as though it were a venomous snake. Captain Morstan swore under his breath. Poirot alone remained calm. He took the slipper, turned it thoughtfully in his small, neat hands. "Interesting," he said at last. "Very interesting indeed." Then, to everyone's astonishment, he lifted the slipper to his nose and inhaled deeply. "The scent of jasmine," he announced softly. "Still quite strong. Remarkable, after 3 days in salt water." He looked slowly around the circle of white faces. The vanishing Méamie has become infinitely more mysterious. For a lady who leaves behind a slipper that has never touched the sea, that is a vanishing of a very particular kind. Chapter 7. Poirot takes charge. The discovery of the slipper broke something in the house. Lord Beaumont shut himself in the library with a decanter and would not come out. Diana Hargrove walked the corridors like a ghost, her eyes red but tearless. Captain Morstan drank whisky in the gunroom and cleaned rifles that were already spotless. Only Hercule Poirot moved with renewed energy, as though the storm had washed the air clean for thought. At 10 the next morning, he summoned everyone, including the servants, to the long drawing-room. Rain still slashed the windows, but the worst of the gale had passed. The sea was the colour of gunmetal, sullen and exhausted. Poirot stood before the fire, hands clasped behind his back, green eyes bright as a cat's. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we have a problem most exquisite. A lady disappears from a locked tower. A slipper is found on the rocks below, yet it carries no trace of salt water, only the perfume of jasmine. Someone wishes us to believe in suicide, or accident, or perhaps a miracle. Hercule Poirot, he does not believe in miracles, only in method. From this moment, no one leaves the island without my permission. The telephone line, conveniently broken by the storm, will remain broken until I say otherwise. The yacht will stay at anchor. Captain Morstan, you will place the keys to the boathouse in my hand." Morstan's jaw dropped. "See here, Poirot. You mistake me, mon capitaine. I do not accuse, I prevent. There has been one vanishing. There will not be a second." He turned to the butler. "Grimstitch, you will search every room, every cupboard, every attic. You will look particularly for a white evening gown and its matching slipper. You will report only to me." Grimstitch, trained since birth never to show surprise, merely bowed. To old Trewather, "You, mon ami, will accompany me to the base of the tower at low tide. We examine the rocks." Finally, to Diana Hargrove, "Mademoiselle, you will give me the letters your sister wrote to you in the last month, all of them." Diana opened her mouth to protest, then closed it. Something in Poirot's gaze made argument impossible. Within the hour the house was in motion like a kicked ant-hill. Poirot and Trewather descended the zigzag steps to the cove. The tide was out, exposing a wilderness of black rock and bladder-wrack. Gulls quarrelled over treasures flung up by the storm. They made their way to the foot of the lighthouse. The coral stone rose sheer, wet and shining. 80 feet above, the lantern room was a pink disk against the sky. Poirot studied the cliff face with a pocket lens. "Regardez," he said at last, pointing to a patch where the rosy stone was scarred pale. "Here the coral has been scraped, and here," he bent stiffly, "a piton. See the bright metal where rust has been rubbed away. Someone climbed this wall, and recently." Trewather squinted with his one good eye. "No man could climb that in a storm, sir, not without wings. Yet someone did, or something that looked very much like a man." Poirot straightened, eyes narrowed against the wind. "Tell me, Trewather, in your long service here, have you ever heard of the Beaumont ghost?" The old man crossed himself. "They do say, sir, that the First Lady, the one what came with the coral stones from the Red Sea, threw herself from the tower when her lover was lost at sea. On nights of storm she walks the lantern gallery, calling for him. Poirot smiled without humour. Convenient, these ghosts. They explain so much that is better left unexplained. They returned to the house. In the hall, Grimstitch waited, face impassive. "Well?" Poirot demanded. "Nothing, sir. No white gown, no second slipper, but in Lady Beaumont's dressing-room the jewel casket was open and empty. Every piece gone. Diamonds, emeralds, the famous Beaumont pearls." Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. "Ah, now we begin to see the shape of things. A disappearance, yes, but also a robbery most insolent." He dismissed the servants and climbed to his room. There, spread upon the bed, lay the letters Diana had reluctantly surrendered. They were written in a wild, slanting hand on heavy deckle-edged paper, scented, even now, with jasmine. The earlier ones were full of boredom and small cruelties. "Evelyn watches me like a jailer. The sea is a prison wall painted blue. Felix is a fool, but at least he makes me laugh." The final letter, dated the day before the vanishing, was different. "Dearest D, it is arranged. On the night of the full moon, I leave this cage forever. Do not grieve. By the time you read this, I shall be beyond the reach of husbands, sisters, and storms. Tell no one until it is done. You will find a little gift hidden in the winter garden to remember me by. Your loving, wicked B." At the bottom, in a different ink, as though added at the last moment, "If anything goes wrong, look to the chapel. The sinful woman is a light in darkness." Poirot read it 3 times. Then he folded the letter with great care, placed it in his pocketbook next to the jasmine petal, and allowed himself one small, triumphant chuckle. "Eh bien," he said to the empty room, "the lady planned her escape with great thoroughness. But even the cleverest mouse does not see the trap until the wire snaps across her pretty neck." He rang the bell, when George appeared, impeccable despite the chaos below. Poirot said only, "My valet, bring me the small black case from the bottom of the trunk, and the silk rope. Tonight, Hercule Poirot goes climbing." Chapter 8. Shadows in the Storm. The second storm arrived at dusk, fiercer than the first. The barometer fell like a stone. Windows rattled in their frames. Somewhere, a slate tore from the roof and smashed on the terrace like a gunshot. Poirot refused dinner. Instead, he sat in his room, fully dressed in a dark suit, a black woolen cap pulled low, soft kid gloves on his small hands. On the bed lay the coil of silk rope, thin as a lady's scarf, yet capable, he had once assured a sceptical Hastings, of holding an elephant. Beside it rested a tiny electric torch, a set of skeleton keys, and a revolver so small it looked like a toy. Poirot disliked firearms, but he disliked being murdered even more. At 11 o'clock, the house fell silent. The servants had been sent to bed. Lord Beaumont was drunk and weeping in the library. Diana Hargrove had taken laudanum. Captain Morstan had locked himself in the gun-room with a second bottle of whisky and, Poirot suspected, a loaded Webley, perfect. Poirot slipped from his room like a shadow. The corridor was lit only by a single lamp turned low. He descended the back stair, past the kitchens, and let himself out through the scullery door. The night was a black animal, roaring and wet. Rain lashed sideways, stinging like birdshot. Within seconds he was soaked to the skin, but the woolen cap kept the water from his eyes. He crossed the swaying bridge to the lighthouse. The door stood as Beaumont had left it, locked. Poirot knelt, produced his picks, and in less than 30 seconds the great lock sighed open. He stepped inside and closed the door softly behind him. The tower breathed around him, cold and damp. He did not switch on his torch yet. The darkness was his ally. Slowly, he climbed the iron spiral, counting the steps aloud under his breath to steady his nerves. At the service room, he paused. The air was different tonight. Warmer, scented faintly with jasmine and something else. Ozone, perhaps, or fear. He climbed the final stair to the lantern gallery. Moonlight, thin and watery, leaked through the storm clouds and struck the great lens. It fractured into 1,000 shivering shards across the floor. Poirot stood motionless at the head of the stair and spoke into the darkness, conversational, almost friendly. "Bonsoir, madame. It is time we had our little talk." Silence. Only the storm. Then, from the far side of the gallery, behind the black bulk of the lens, came the softest rustle of silk. A woman stepped into the fractured moonlight. Lady Beatrice Beaumont. She was thinner, pale as the moon itself, but unmistakably alive. Her black hair hung loose to the waist. She wore a man's dressing gown of dark crimson over a nightgown. In her right hand, she held a small nickel-plated pistol that looked very steady. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, and her voice was exactly as he had imagined it. Low, amused, dangerous. "You are either the cleverest man in England or the greatest fool, possibly both." Poirot bowed, a small, perfect movement. "Madame, I am flattered you know my name. I know a great many things." She moved sideways, keeping the lens between them. "I also know that if you take one step nearer, I shall shoot you and then myself. The coroner will call it a tragic murder-suicide. No one will ever know the truth." Poirot did not move. "Permit me to doubt that, madame. You have gone to extraordinary trouble to disappear, not to die. And you are not the sort of woman who shares her stage with a Belgian detective." For the first time her lips curved in something close to a smile. "You are right, of course. I have no intention of dying, but I will kill you if I must. I have killed before." She raised the pistol a fraction. Poirot's eyes never left hers. "Tell me, madame, how did you leave the tower that night? The door was locked from the outside by your husband. The windows are 80 feet above the rocks. Yet you vanished, taking with you jewels worth a king's ransom. It is a performance worthy of the great Houdini himself." Lady Beaumont laughed softly. "Would you like to see the trick, Monsieur Poirot? It is really very simple when one knows the secret of the tower." She reached behind her and pressed something Poirot could not see. There was a faint click. A section of the floor, 3 boards wide, directly beneath the great lens, swung silently downward on hidden hinges, revealing a black void. "A priest's hole," Poirot murmured, impressed despite himself. "Better. My great-grandfather-in-law was a smuggler as well as a madman. When he built this folly, he included a bolt hole. A narrow shaft drops inside the thickness of the wall to a cave at sea level. At low tide, one may walk out beneath the cliffs to a hidden cove where a boat waits. The jewels paid for the boat and the silence of the man who crewed it." She stepped lightly onto the lip of the trap. "In a moment I shall descend, close the trap behind me, and by dawn I shall be in France. A new name, a new life. You, alas, will be found at the foot of the tower, with a bullet in your heart and my second slipper in your pocket. Another unsolvable mystery." Poirot sighed, a small, almost paternal sound. "Madame, you have overlooked one tiny detail." He raised his right hand. In it he held not a weapon, but the silver kid slipper. "This little shoe never touched salt water. Yet tonight the tide is high. If you descend now, the shaft will be flooded to the roof. You will drown like a rat long before you reach your boat." For the first time uncertainty flickered across her face. "You are bluffing." "Am I?" Poirot glanced at his watch. The tide turned at 10:47. It is now 23 minutes past midnight. Even now the water laps the 10th step. In 10 minutes more, it will be at the 20th. Shall we wait and listen?" From the depths of the shaft came the unmistakable hollow slap of waves against stone, rising, rising. Lady Beaumont's knuckles whitened on the pistol. Poirot took one deliberate step forward. "Give me the gun, madame. The performance is over." She hesitated a single heartbeat. Then the trapdoor began to rise again, automatically, on its counterweights. In that instant, she made her choice. She hurled the pistol straight at Poirot's head and leapt for the closing trap. Poirot ducked. The pistol struck the lens and shattered a pane with an explosion of glass. Lady Beaumont's foot found the narrowing edge. Too late. The trapdoor slammed shut like a guillotine. There was a sharp, cut-off scream, then silence except for the storm and the hungry sea below. Poirot stood very still, breathing hard for once in his life. Then softly he said, "Mon Dieu, I did not intend that." He opened the trap again with the lever she had used. The shaft was black water now, swirling and foaming. Nothing moved upon it. He closed the trap, picked up the fallen pistol, and descended the iron stair for the last time. Behind him, the coral lighthouse stood blind and empty, its secret swallowed forever by the tide. But Hercule Poirot knew that some resolutions are written not in courtrooms, but in salt water and darkness. Chapter 9. Hidden Secrets Unveiled. Poirot did not return to the house at once. He stood in the service room for a long while, listening to the sea gnawing at the foundations of the tower, the little pistol cold in his gloved hand. Then he wiped the weapon clean of prints with his silk handkerchief, dropped it into the shaft after its mistress, and heard the small, final splash. Only then did he leave the lighthouse, locking the oak door behind him with Lord Beaumont's own key. He posted the key through the letterbox of the tower, an absurd gesture perhaps, but Poirot disliked loose ends. The storm had spent itself. A thin, sour dawn was breaking when he crossed the bridge and let himself back into the house. The hall was empty, but a thread of light showed beneath the library door. Poirot tapped once and entered. Lord Beaumont was slumped in a leather wing chair, an empty decanter at his elbow, eyes red and swollen. He looked up as Poirot came in, and something in the little Belgian's face made him straighten. "You have seen her?" he said. It was not a question. "I have seen what remains of the affair, my lord. Your wife is beyond earthly justice now." Beaumont closed his eyes. Dead? Since a little after midnight. The sea has taken her, and the secret shaft inside the tower wall. She planned everything most brilliantly. The false vanishing, the jewels, the boat waiting in the hidden cove. She would have succeeded had she not miscalculated the tide by a few fatal minutes. Beaumont's hands began to shake. She meant to leave me ruined and disgraced. The jewels were not insured. The scandal. He broke off, staring at Poirot with sudden terror. "You will tell the police?" Poirot considered him for a long moment. "Tell them what, my lord? That a woman who never existed after the night of the full moon has now, by an unfortunate accident, drowned in a passage no one knew was there. They will call it suicide. They will search for a body that will never be found. You will be pitied, not blamed. The insurance company will pay for the jewels, eventually. Life will go on." He paused, then added softly, "Provided, of course, that certain small matters are put right." Beaumont understood at once. "Name your price." Poirot looked almost wounded. "Price? Hercule Poirot is not a blackmailer, my lord. I speak of justice, not money." There is another who believed himself in love with your wife, who may, even now, be planning foolish things. Captain Morstan must leave this island today and never return. And Miss Diana Hargrove, she has suffered enough. You will settle upon her the Hampshire estate and an income for life. She loved her sister, and love should not be punished. Beaumont nodded dumbly. It shall be done before noon. Poirot inclined his head. Then the matter is closed. He turned to leave, but Beaumont's voice stopped him. Monsieur, did she suffer? Poirot thought of the single, cut-off scream. No, he lied gently. It was very quick. He left the library and climbed the stairs to his room. There he found George laying out fresh linen with the serenity of a priest preparing vestments. "Good morning, sir," George said. "Shall you require the bath immediately, or would you prefer coffee first?" "Coffee, George. Very hot and very strong. And then the bath. I have spent the night in company with tragedy, and tragedy is always damp." George permitted himself the ghost of a smile. "Very good, sir." An hour later, bathed, shaved, and immaculate in dove grey, Poirot descended to find the household assembled in the dining room. Diana Hargrove's eyes were swollen. Captain Morstan looked as though he had not slept at all. Poirot took his place at the table and addressed them with perfect calm. "Mes amis, the mystery is resolved. Lady Beaumont did not commit suicide. She staged her own disappearance with the intention of beginning a new life abroad. Last night, in attempting to leave by a secret passage inside the tower wall, she was caught by the rising tide and drowned. Her body, alas, will never be recovered." He looked slowly around the table. "There is, therefore, no crime to investigate, merely a tragic misadventure. I shall inform the authorities accordingly when the telephone line is repaired. Captain Morstan, the yacht is at your disposal. I believe you have regimental business in London." Morstan opened his mouth, found nothing to say, and closed it again. Diana Hargrove stared at Poirot for a long moment, then asked the only question that mattered. "Was she happy at the end?" Poirot met her gaze steadily. "She was free," he said, which was not quite the same thing. After breakfast, he walked once more to the conservatory. The jasmine was already beginning to droop, its moment of impossible flowering over. He plucked one last blossom, placed it between the pages of his notebook beside the first petal and the final letter, and closed the book with a soft snap. "Adieu, madame," he murmured. "You were, perhaps, the most brilliant criminal I never arrested." Chapter 10. The False Alibi. The Coral Queen carried Captain Morstan away at noon. He stood at the rail in a camel-hair coat, staring back at the island until it dwindled to a pink fleck on the grey water. He did not wave. Poirot watched from the terrace, hands clasped behind his back, then turned and walked briskly to the ruined chapel on the northern cliff. Diana Hargrove was already there, kneeling among the nettles, a small trowel in her gloved hands. She had been digging. She looked up as Poirot's shadow fell across her. "You knew," she said simply. "I suspected, mademoiselle. The Latin inscription, the letter that spoke of the sinful woman being a light in darkness, the gift hidden in the winter garden, they all pointed here. May I?" He took the trowel and scraped away a final layer of earth. A tin box, green with verdigris, emerged. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay the Beaumont jewels, the great collar of pearls, the emerald tiara, the diamond sunburst Beatrice had worn at the Devonshire House ball. Diana sat back on her heels, suddenly very tired. "She gave them to me the night before she vanished. Said they were my insurance if Evelyn ever turned cruel. She made me swear to hide them here, until she sent word from France." "And you have heard nothing? Nothing? Not a line? Not a whisper. Poirot closed the box and tucked it beneath his cape. Then we must assume the worst, or perhaps the best. Your sister is beyond needing jewels now. Diana's eyes filled. I should have stopped her. You could not. Beatrice Beaumont was a woman who decided her own fate the day she drew breath. Come, the tide is turning, and I still have one small matter to settle with your brother-in-law. They found Lord Beaumont in the library, signing papers with the mechanical obedience of a man who has lost the will to resist. A solicitor from Penzance waited, discreet and black-suited. Poirot placed the tin box on the desk. Your jewels, my lord, recovered from the chapel. Miss Hargrove acted only as her sister asked. There is no question of theft. Beaumont stared at the box as though it were Pandora's. Then it is truly finished. Almost. Poirot's voice sharpened. One final point. On the night of the disappearance, you told the police you locked the tower door at 9:15 and did not return until 11:30. Yet the key never left your possession, you said. That was not entirely accurate, n'est-ce pas? Beaumont flushed. I don't know what you mean. Permit me. Poirot produced from his pocket a second iron key, slightly smaller, blackened with age. This was found by Grimsditch this morning, hidden behind a loose brick in the old magazine beneath the cliff. It opens the tower door from the inside. A duplicate made long ago by your smuggler ancestor. Beatrice had it copied again in Penzance 6 months ago. You knew this. Beaumont's hands clenched on the desk. Yes, he said at last, voice raw. I knew. She showed it to me the week before. Said if I ever locked her in again she would leave by a door I could not follow. I laughed. I thought it a joke. He looked up, eyes hollow. When she vanished I panicked. I said the key never left me because if the police discovered the duplicate, they would realize she had planned everything. They would call it desertion, not tragedy. The insurance would refuse the claim. I would be ruined. Poirot nodded slowly. And so you created the perfect locked room mystery to hide a simple elopement that went wrong. You even allowed the slipper to be found, dry, perfumed, impossible, to convince everyone she had leapt to her death. A clever touch. Beaumont buried his face in his hands. I killed her, he whispered. By my silence, I killed her. No, Poirot said firmly. You merely delayed the truth. The sea did the rest. He turned to the solicitor. Monsieur, you will draw up papers transferring the Hampshire estate to Miss Hargrove at once. Lord Beaumont will sign them. Then the matter is closed forever. There has been enough grief on this island. The solicitor bowed and withdrew. Diana looked at Poirot with something close to wonder. You could have destroyed him. Destruction is easy, mademoiselle. Mercy is the more difficult art. That evening, as the sun sank into a copper sea, Poirot stood alone on the terrace. The coral lighthouse caught the last light and glowed like a dying ember. He opened his notebook, removed the 2 jasmine petals and the final letter, and let the wind take them. They fluttered upward, white against the crimson sky, then vanished over the water. Poirot raised his hat a fraction, a salute to a worthy adversary who had, in the end, escaped even him. Bon voyage, madame, he murmured. You played the game superbly. And in the theatre of crime, sometimes the curtain falls at the perfect moment. Behind him, the great door of the house closed for the last time. The Coral Queen was already nosing into the cove to take Hercule Poirot back to the world of the living. The lighthouse stood empty, its secret drowned, its light forever dark. But on certain nights when the moon is full, and the jasmine in the ruined conservatory blooms against all reason, fishermen passing the island swear they see a woman in white at the lantern gallery, arms outstretched to the storm, calling a name no one remembers. And sometimes, just sometimes, the wind carries back an answer. Chapter 11. The Coral Clue. The Coral Queen did not sail at dawn. At 7:30, old Trewatha came limping up the terrace steps, hat in hand, his one good eye wide, with something between terror and triumph. "Begging your pardon, monsieur, my lord, there's something you must see. Down in the cauldron." The cauldron of Lear was the deepest of the rock pools on the island's western side. A perfect circle cut into the cliff, 30 feet across, into which the sea roared at high tide and then retreated, leaving a cauldron of still green water ringed by knife-sharp coral stone. They followed the old man down the treacherous path. Poirot, Lord Beaumont, hollow-eyed but sober, Diana Hargrove, and 2 nervous footmen carrying ropes. The tide had just turned. The cauldron lay quiet, its surface filmed with foam like lace. Something floated in the centre. A body, a woman's body, dressed in white silk now shredded to ribbons, black hair drifting like ink in the water. Lord Beaumont made a sound that was not human and started forward. Poirot caught his arm. "No, my lord, wait." He took a boat hook from one of the footmen and, with delicate precision, drew the body to the edge. It was Beatrice Beaumont. Or rather, it was what the sea had left of her. The face half-eaten by crabs, one hand missing, the remaining fingers still glittering with rings. Yet unmistakably her. Diana turned away and was quietly sick against the rock. Poirot knelt, heedless of his dove-grey trousers, and studied the corpse with clinical calm. Then he did something that made even Trewatha blanch. He lifted the corpse's right foot. The silver kid slipper was still on it, sodden now, the heel snapped exactly as in its mate. Poirot's eyes glittered. "Regardez," he said softly, "the slipper that was found dry on the rocks 3 days ago, and now its twin soaked through, attached to the lady herself. Curious, n'est-ce pas?" He reached into his pocket and produced the first slipper, the one that had never touched salt water. He laid it beside its mate. They were identical, except for one tiny detail. On the inside rim of the dry slipper, almost invisible unless one knew where to look, was a minute scratch in the shape of a coral branch. Poirot straightened, eyes blazing. "Mon Dieu! I have been the complete imbecile, the greatest fool in Christendom." Lord Beaumont stared at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, my lord, that your wife did not die last night. She died 3 nights ago, exactly as the world believed. What I met in the lantern room was not Lady Beaumont, but someone who wished very much to be taken for her." He turned to Diana Hargrove, who had gone very white. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "it is time for the truth, all of it." Diana's hands flew to her throat. "I don't—" Poirot raised a hand. "Do not insult the intelligence that has been insulted enough. You are the same height as your sister, the same slender build. In the dark, with your hair loose and jasmine on your wrists, who would know the difference, especially a man who expected to see a ghost?" He reached into his pocket and drew out the final letter, the one that had spoken of the sinful woman and the gift in the chapel. This letter was not written by Beatrice. The handwriting is clever, but the formation of the capital B is different. Yours, I think. And the jasmine in the conservatory, it blooms only when forced by a loving hand. Your hand. Diana began to shake. Lord Beaumont looked from one to the other, comprehension dawning like poison. "Diana, what have you done?" She laughed then, a terrible sound. "What have I done? I saved us all. Beatrice was leaving. She had the jewels, the boat, the new lover waiting in Brittany. She laughed when I begged her to stay. Said I was a dried-up spinster who would die worshipping her shadow. So I gave her what she wanted most, a perfect disappearance, forever." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I drugged the chocolate with laudanum and a little something extra from the chemist in Penzance. When she was unconscious, I dressed her in the white gown, carried her down the secret shaft at low tide, and left her in the cauldron weighted with chains from the boathouse. The sea did the rest." She looked at Poirot with sudden defiance. "Then I staged the vanishing. I wore her perfume, left the slipper dry on the rocks so everyone would think she leapt. I even climbed the tower last night to convince you she was still alive. I thought if you believed she had escaped, no one would look too closely at a body that might wash up later." Poirot nodded slowly. "And the jewels? Beatrice gave them to me for safekeeping. She was going to send for them. I buried them in the chapel as she asked, but when she was dead, they became mine, my freedom." Lord Beaumont took one step toward her, face twisted. "You murdered my wife." "I murdered a monster," Diana said. "She would have destroyed us all." She turned suddenly and ran, not toward the path, but straight to the edge of the cauldron. "Diana, no!" Beaumont shouted. She paused at the brink, looked back once, and smiled, an odd, peaceful smile. "Tell them it was suicide," she said. "Sisters should share everything, even endings." Then she stepped backward into the green water and did not rise again. The sea closed over her like a green lid. Poirot stood motionless, the two silver slippers in his hands, one wet, one dry, identical, yet forever separate. Lord Beaumont fell to his knees among the coral stones and wept like a child. Old Trewatha crossed himself and muttered a prayer in Cornish. Poirot looked out to sea, where the Coral Queen waited patiently at anchor. "Two women," he said softly, "both brilliant, both trapped, both choosing the sea over the cage. And Hercule Poirot, who prides himself on seeing everything, saw only what he was meant to see." He placed the slippers side by side on the rock. "Let the tide take them both," he said. "Some mysteries are best left to the ocean." He turned and began to climb the path to the house, his small, neat footprints the only mark on the wet stone. Behind him, the cauldron of Lear began to fill again, slowly, patiently, as it had done for 1,000 years, erasing every trace of the Beaumont sisters and their terrible love. Chapter 12. The Gathering of Suspects, Whitehaven Mansions, London. 1 week later, the fire crackled with expensive applewood. Outside, a November fog pressed against the windows like wet wool. Inside, Hercule Poirot sat very straight in his favourite square armchair, hands folded, moustaches waxed to lethal points. 3 people faced him across the carpet. Lord Evelyn Beaumont, thinner, grey at the temples, eyes permanently reddened. Old Trewatha, uncomfortable in a stiff collar, clutching a mug of tea as though it were a lifebelt. And Inspector James Vane of the Cornish Constabulary, a solid man with the patient expression of someone who has long ago accepted that life is mostly paperwork. Poirot spoke first. "Messieurs, I have asked you here for the final act. The inquest at Penzance returned verdicts of accidental death for Lady Beaumont and suicide for Miss Hargrove, while of unsound mind. The coroner was content. The newspapers have moved on to fresher scandals. Yet 3 of us in this room know that the truth is rather different." Inspector Vane stirred. "You said you had new evidence, Monsieur Poirot." "I have clarity, mon ami. That is always more dangerous than evidence." He rose and walked to the mantelpiece, where 2 small objects lay on a square of black velvet. The silver kid slippers, one still faintly stained with salt, the other immaculate, "These slippers," Poirot said, "are the entire case. One was found dry 3 days after the disappearance. The other was on the foot of the corpse recovered from the cauldron. Yet they are a perfect pair, made by the same Parisian shoemaker in the same week. How can one be soaked and the other untouched by the sea?" He turned to Lord Beaumont. "Milord, you told the police that when you locked the tower door at 9:15, your wife was alive and reading Baudelaire. That was true, but you omitted one detail. You returned to the tower at 10:30, did you not?" Beaumont's head jerked up. Yes, I heard her cry out. I thought the storm had frightened her. I unlocked the door, climbed the stairs. She was asleep in the chair, the book fallen to the floor. I kissed her forehead and left again. I swear that is all." Poirot nodded. "You left, locking the door behind you." At that moment, Beatrice was already dying. The chocolate you brought at 9:15 had been laced with a massive dose of chloral hydrate, enough to kill within the hour. The faint taste of almonds I detected was not cyanide as I first feared, but the artificial flavouring used to mask the drug. He turned to Trewather. "And you, mon vieux, you were not in your cottage that night. You were in the hidden shaft beneath the tower, waiting. When Lord Beaumont left the second time, you climbed the inside stair. There is a narrow iron ladder for maintenance, known only to the mechanic. You found Lady Beaumont unconscious. You carried her down the shaft at low tide, chained her with the anchor chain you had prepared, and dropped her into the cauldron." Trewather's mug rattled against his teeth. Poirot continued, almost gently. "You then returned to the lantern room, wiped one slipper clean of salt, the one she had lost struggling in the shaft, and placed it high on the rocks where it would be found dry. You scattered jasmine petals for good measure. You knew the tide would bring the body back wearing its mate. A perfect locked room murder, disguised as a perfect vanishing." Inspector Vane leaned forward. "Motive? Money, of course," Poirot said. "Lady Beaumont had changed her will only a fortnight earlier. If she died before leaving England, everything, the jewels, the Hampshire estate, the London house, went not to her husband, but to her sister Diana. Diana, who had loved Trewather in secret for 20 years. Diana, who was tired of being the plain sister, the unpaid companion. Diana, who persuaded you that murder was the only way you could ever have her." Lord Beaumont made a strangled sound. Poirot raised a hand. "But Diana was cleverer than either of you realized. She suspected the plan from the first. When the body was recovered, she saw the slipper clue instantly. She knew the pair had been bought together. That is why she tried to convince me Beatrice was still alive, to buy time to find proof and protect herself. In the end, she chose silence and, finally, the same green water that had taken her sister. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Trewather set down his mug with great care. "I've nothing to say, sir, except that her ladyship treated Miss Diana like dirt on her shoe. And Miss Diana, she were the kindest soul that ever drew breath." He looked at Poirot steadily. "Do what you must." Inspector Vane stood, solid and official. "Josiah Trewather, I arrest you for the murder of Beatrice, Lady Beaumont." Poirot turned to the window so that no one should see his face. Outside the fog was lifting. A weak sun touched the Thames to dull silver. He spoke so softly that only the crackling fire heard him. "Two sisters," he murmured, "one who took everything, one who was given nothing. In the end, the sea gave them both the same cold equality." He did not watch as they led Trewather away. Some resolutions, he thought, are too sad even for the little grey cells to celebrate.